Welcome back, learner. We know you're insanely curious, and we've got a highly anticipated deep dive for you today. Our mission, unpacking an exclusive advanced look at excerpts from R F Kuang's unreleased novel, KATABASIS.
Yeah, we've got a massive stack of sources, notes, and early chapters here to get you up to speed on what promises to be a pretty wild ride.
It really does. To set the stage, I want you to imagine a scenario. Have you ever had a boss or a mentor who was just relentlessly toxic, like someone who made you absolutely miserable, but you needed their recommendations so badly for your career that you literally go to hell and back for it?
Right. For most people, that's just a saying.
Exactly. But for Alice Law, who is a brilliant, totally overworked postgraduate student at Cambridge's Department of Analytic Magic, this isn't a metaphor. I mean, it's basically just her Tuesday.
The premise Kuang sets up here it's incredibly striking right out the gate.
Yeah.
Alice's advisor is the world-renowned but utterly cruel Professor Jacob Grimes. And, well, he's dead.
Very dead.
Because Alice desperately needs his signature to get a tenure-track job in a shrinking academic market, she decides she's going to travel to the underworld. Specifically, Lord Yama's domain. She's going to drag his soul back to the land of the living.
Just a casual grad student errand, you know?
Basically. But what makes this story so compelling isn't just the fantasy adventure aspect. It's the biting, satirical look at the hyper-competitive world of academia. The text explores the nature of self-delusion and really digs deeply into the philosophical mechanics of memory, punishment, and reincarnation.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the magic system in this universe is unlike anything you've probably encountered before. Forget cauldrons, wands, dramatic spell casting, all of that.
Yeah, no quotey hats here.
Right. At Cambridge, analytic magic is performed with a humble stick of chalk and logical paradoxes. I saw this mention of the Sorite's paradox in our notes. How does a classical philosophy puzzle actually translate into casting a spell?
So it operates on the idea that the natural laws of the world are set, but they're fragile. If you can spin the right web of untruths using linguistic trickery or logical conundrums, you can actually bewilder physics. The Sorite's paradox, or the paradox of the heap, is the perfect example of this.
Walk us through that one.
Imagine a heap of sand. If you remove one grain, it's still a heap. If you remove two, still a heap. But exactly how many grains of sand do you have to remove before it's no longer a heap?
I mean, nobody can name that precise moment.
That's the trick. In that split-second blink of confusion, when the human mind doubts reality and can't define what a heap actually is, magic happens.
The universe sort of stumbles.
Exactly. The universe stumbles, and the magician steps into that gap to rewrite the rules. Magic in this world is essentially the act of telling lies about reality. To make the world dance to your whims, you need a forceful, single-minded capacity for self-delusion. You have to hold a conclusion in your head and believe, through sheer force of will, that everything else is wrong.
I love how Kuang ties that magic system directly to the protagonist's daily life. Because how else does a grad student survive an abusive, grueling program?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Alice survives graduate school using this exact same psychological mechanism. She deludes herself into believing her hard work will eventually be rewarded.
Which is such a common trap.
It really is. She convinces herself that her advisor's cruelty is just tough love, and that this elusive, romanticized life of the mind is worth sacrificing her mental and physical health for. The same delusion required to bewilder physics is required to survive Cambridge.
I want you to reflect on that for a second, learner, whatever your industry or career is. How often do we use self-delusion to survive a grueling work environment or to justify toxic workplace cultures? It's a really sharp critique.
And it sets up the stakes perfectly.
It does. But we have to talk about the inciting incident that kicks off this whole journey. The death of Professor Grimes is spectacularly gory. Alice is sleep-deprived, addled with caffeine, and deeply resentful while assisting him in the lab. In a moment of sheer frustration, she purposefully skips what's called the ant test. What exactly is that protocol?
The ant test is a foundational safety check in analytic magic. You trace a pencil around the chalk pentagram to ensure there are absolutely no gaps. If an ant can follow the line all the way around without breaking its path, the loop is closed and safe to use. By skipping this, Alice leaves a microscopic gap in the chalk circle.
Because of that tiny gap, howling dimensional winds rip Professor Grimes apart, and Kuang does not hold back on the description here.
No, she really goes for it.
His eyeballs pop like grapes. His intestines spool out across the floor like a jump rope, and a piece of his jaw literally lands with a plop in his afternoon cup of Darjeeling tea. It's horrifying, and it's entirely Alice's fault. Almost immediately, panic sets in, but not necessarily out of guilt. She regrets it because of the job market.
All right, the original source notes point out that conservative policies have heavily slashed university funding, so tenure-track magic jobs are vanishingly rare.
They're basically non-existent.
Exactly. The job market has shrunk to almost nothing, making Grimes' recommendation the absolute only lifeline she has left. Without that letter, Alice fears she'll be forced into what academics derisively call alt academia.
Which just means normal industry jobs.
Yes, just working a regular job.
Yeah.
But to her, losing her status in the ivory tower feels like a fate worse than death.
So she draws a pentagram to go to hell and fix her mistake. But right as she's leaving, her rival shows up. Enter Peter Murdoch. He's brilliant, effortlessly genius, always has messy hair, and is infuriatingly nice. He's the darling of the department who never has to try, which naturally makes Alice resent him completely.
Of course.
He alters her pentagram perfectly and forces his way into the trip. But the toll for this journey is staggering. It costs half her remaining lifespan. About 30 years, gone in an instant.
You really have to look at it from the perspective of an academic who feels their life is over anyway, without that tenure track position. If your entire identity is wrapped up in your institutional prestige, giving up 30 years of a life you'd consider worthless without that prestige becomes a rational, albeit extremely dark, calculation.
They pay the toll and arrive in hell, which completely subverts expectations, first impressions. It's not fire and brimstone. Meteorologically speaking, it's just a bit chilly, like an English spring. It's an endless expanse of gray silt. Right above them, they see the viewing pavilion, which is an upside-down, translucent reflection of Cambridge.
The ghosts linger at this pavilion just to feel included in the world of the living. It's a dual haunting. They want to see what everyone is up to see if they're remembered. It's less about demonic malice and more about a tragic, lingering obsession with the rituals they left behind.
Alice and Peter need to find Grimes in the fields of Asphodel, which is essentially limbo. Alice tries to summon him using a dowsing anchor, just a wooden plaque from his desk. Peter quickly points out that a plaque is way too generic and might summon literally every carpenter who ever lived.
That should be unhelpful.
Very. So here's where it gets really interesting. Peter creates a temporally specific meal sacrifice to summon the recent dead. He lights a pile of cigarettes, tawny port, and lembas bread. And lembas bread, by the way, is this sugary, peanut-based nutrition strip that grad students practically live on.
It's a hyper-specific cultural anchor, but instead of Grimes showing up, they summon Archimedes, the department cat who is seemingly alive and just wandering around hell along with 4 dead undergraduates. These students perished in a lab fire caused by Professor Grimes's negligence 30 years ago.
What blew my mind is why these kids are still hanging around in limbo. They're terrified of the river that wipes memories for reincarnation. They absolutely refuse to cross it.
What's fascinating here is the mathematical and philosophical dread they have regarding reincarnation. Because they were Cambridge magicians, they understand the probabilistic arguments of eternal recurrence.
The math is not in their favor.
Not at all. They've calculated that, given the global population and historical odds, they are statistically overwhelmingly likely to be reborn into poverty rather than a life of Cambridge privilege. They are terrified of losing their minds, of being uneducated. They'd literally rather be stuck in a gray, boring limbo for eternity than risk losing their intellectual status and being reborn as a regular person.
It's bleak, but it perfectly captures that academic elitism. Alice and Peter leave the undergrads behind and keep moving. They eventually hit a massive queue of shades waiting to enter the courts of hell, almost like a line outside an exclusive nightclub. To bypass this, Alice decides they should rock climb the wall separating them from the courts. This wall is 50 meters high and made entirely of compacted human bones. Millions of years of detritus. Why bones? What's the thematic significance of having to scale a wall of human remains?
It serves as the ultimate metaphor for institutions like Cambridge. Academia, and really any ancient institution, is built on the literal and figurative bones of those who came before. You climb to the top of your field by stepping on the research, the failures, and the lives of your predecessors.
That is so deeply ingrained in the culture there. Alice, being a former climber, uses her magical chalk for grip and handles the ascent well. Peter, however, has a massive panic attack halfway up. This leads to a surprisingly tender, vulnerable moment between the two rivals at the top of the wall, hinting at a much more complicated shared history.
Yeah, they have to rely on each other.
Once they top out, they look down at hell stretching before them, and their perspectives differ wildly. Alice looks down and sees this shifting, psychedelic autostereogram. It just gives her a headache. Peter, the logician, realizes they're looking at a three-dimensional hyperbolic space. He starts talking about Poincaré disks and twisted pseudospheres. How do we visualize that without needing a math degree?
The easiest way to picture a non-Euclidean hyperbolic space is to think of a Pringles potato chip.
Okay, I can picture that.
If you draw a triangle on a flat piece of paper, the angles add up to 180 degrees. If you draw that same triangle on the curved saddle shape of a Pringles chip, the angles add up to less than 180 degrees. Space folds away from itself. Parallel lines diverge instead of staying the same distance apart. For Peter, his mathematical mind can parse this geometry.
But hell doesn't stay that way for them, right?
Right. As they climb down, hell actually adapts to the mind of the observer to make the transition easier. Because Grimes, Alice, and Peter are Cambridge academics, the hyperbolic space shifts and manifests around them as an endless, neoclassical university campus. Gothic towers, courtyard walls, paved paths.
Hell mirrors your own moral universe and the things you value most, which brings them to the first court, Pride or Superbia. Naturally, for academics, the Court of Pride is a stunning, multi-story library. It's filled with frantic, weeping shades who are constantly studying. Their eternal punishment is that they must successfully define the good to a panel of deities, the ox head and the horse face, before they can pass to the next court.
The satire really peaks in this library. The dean of this court is the shade of George Edward Moore, a historical pipe-smoking Trinity philosopher. He gives Alice and Peter a tour, and we learn the incredibly petty reasons these souls are trapped in pride. We're not talking about grand Miltonian hubris here. We're talking about professional insecurity.
The list of sins had me laughing out loud. The shades are in there for things like claiming they went to Oxford when they really went to Oxford Brookes. There's a whole study room of creative writers just glaring at each other in silence. There's a guy whose only sin is that he recites pi to show off at parties.
Oh, the pie guy.
Yeah, and a professor who rejected peer-reviewed papers unless they heavily cited his own work. Or people who say they went to school in Boston expecting everyone to know it means Harvard.
It highlights a really profound insight about human nature. People in hyper-competitive environments often weaponize the tiniest amounts of power to mask their own deep-seated insecurities. Institutions incentivize this behavior. You build a wall of academic jargon or petty rules because you're terrified someone will realize you aren't as smart as you claim to be.
And Moore plays right into that.
He does. Moore insists Alice and Peter cannot leave the library because they haven't passed the test. He tries to trap them using formal logic, arguing that the premises of hell's rules mathematically compel them to stay.
But Alice completely destroys his argument using Lewis Carroll's famous logical paradox about modus ponens. I know Carroll is famous for Alice in Wonderland, but break down this logic puzzle for me. How does she use it to defeat Moore?
Lewis Carroll wrote a brilliant dialogue between Achilles and the tortoise. It attacks the very foundation of logical deduction. Normally, if you have premise A and premise B, you can deduce conclusion Z. For example, A, all humans are mortal. B, Socrates is human. Z, Socrates is mortal.
Makes total sense.
But the tortoise asks Achilles, what if I accept A and B, but I refuse to accept the hypothetical rule that says if A and B are true, Z must be true?
So you have to make that rule its own separate premise.
Exactly. You add premise C. If A and B are true, Z must be true. But then the tortoise says, okay, I accept A, B, and C, but I still don't accept the new rule that binds all three to Z. Achilles has to add premise D, then premise E, creating an infinite regress. Alice uses this exact trap on Moore. She forces him to continually write down new premises to justify why they have to stay.
And while he is frantically scribbling at his desk, totally trapped in an infinite loop of his own logical rules, Alice and Peter just literally sneak out the front door.
It's such a clever nod to the limitations of formal logic.
It really is. And it allows them to escape into the quiet outside, bringing them directly to the shores of the River Liffey. The leaf looks incredible in Kuang's description. From a distance, it looks like black obsidian. When you look closer, it's a swirling churn of colorful memories floating in the water. A teddy bear, a glass of wine, a wrinkled hand. Alice gets completely entranced by it. Old Lady Meng Po is on the shore, offering her a drink that will wash away all the crushing anxiety, the toxic ambition, and the trauma of her mind.
It's a very tempting offer.
Alice nearly walks right into the water. She's so exhausted by the pressure of her life that oblivion sounds like a mercy. Peter has to grab her and force her to recite her academic catechism just to snap her out of it.
This raises an important question about the nature of the Lethe in this universe. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it ties deeply to Heraclitus' theory of flux. Heraclitus famously said that you cannot step in the same river twice because it's not the same river and you're not the same person. Kuang positions the lethe as a punishment, but as necessary recycling of the soul.
A way to wipe the slate clean.
By wiping memories, the burden of past lives and the rigid ego are destroyed. Letting go of identity is the only way true rebirth is possible. The story heavily implies that clinging to our identities, our job titles, our prestige, our grudges, is the actual source of our suffering in the underworld.
They don't have time to sit and philosophize for long, though, because we get a thrilling final sequence for this deep dive. As they're walking along the shore, they hear a clicking sound. Over the dunes come 3 skeletal, dog-like creatures. They look like miniature versions of Cerberus, missing their eyes, just sniffing the air, hunting for them. But here's the massive twist. Their bones are bound together by glowing, powdery chalk.
That detail changes the entire stakes of the narrative. According to the deep lore of Cambridge's magic system, chalk powers all analytic magic. It's the physical medium for the self-delusion. But chalk has never been known to work in hell. The physics of the underworld usually reject it.
So if it's working now?
If there are chalk-animated bone dogs roaming the shores of the Lethe, it means Alice and Peter are not the only living magicians down there. Someone incredibly powerful, with abilities far beyond anything seen on the surface, is already navigating hell, and they are actively watching them.
So what does this all mean? Let's recap this wild ride. We've gone from a gruesome magical accident caused by a desperate grad student skipping a basic safety protocol, all the way down to a non-Euclidean underworld. We've scaled walls of compacted human bone, outsmarted logic-looping library ghosts who lied about their credentials, and ended up facing chalk-animated hellhounds on the shores of a memory-wiping river.
Thematically, it's a brilliant synthesis of fantasy and critique. Kuang uses the ultimate extreme, literally traversing the underworld, to satirize the lengths we go to for prestige. It strips away the polished veneer of academic institutions to show the toxicity underneath. More than that, it poses a chilling question about identity. Our identities can become so completely wrapped up in our work, our status, and our pride that losing those things genuinely feels worse than death or worse than eternal limbo.
It really makes you think about what we value on a daily basis. Which leads me to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. The story heavily suggests that hell mirrors your own moral universe. It adapts to the things you value most in life, which is why Alice and Peter ended up on a neoclassical campus surrounded by libraries. So if King Yama designed a first court specifically tailored to your industry, your ambitions, and your petty workplace grievances, what would your personal hell look like? Think about that next time you're sitting in a meeting that could have been an email. Thanks for bringing these incredible sources to the table, learner. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.